Practice. Repetition is the mother of skill. Tony Robbins. Practice is the repeated performance of something for the purpose of acquiring a skill, or it can refer to the condition arrived by the experience or exercise. Practice is also used as a synonym for the words habit and custom, or it can be used as a descriptive word for the action or process of performing a routine. With habit replacement, practice is a verb that means specifically fine-tuning one's craft by repeating the actions necessary to achieve a goal or desired outcome. The repetition of an action has a surprisingly similar effect on the brain when compared to the visualization of an action. Both signal the brain to begin mapping a new neural pathway from the action being practiced by the body or imagined in the mind. The more you practice, the stronger the connections become that make up the pathway. Keep up the practice until a new pathway becomes permanent and the foundation is established for a new habit. Continued repetition over time will build on the new foundation, transforming it into a bona fide new habit. Incidentally, in the case of visualization, new neural pathways correspond to the image of reality, whereas practice of a physical action will establish pathways that have a physical model. But remember, as far as we can tell, the brain processes the image of the physical and the actual physical in the same way. It does not seem to distinguish between the two. This may explain in part why stroke and accident victims can sometimes achieve a degree of recovery from paralysis. There are literally hundreds of automatic behaviors or habits that we rely on every day. Some are as simple as putting the cap back on the tube of the toothpaste after brushing your teeth, while others are a little more involved and require more than one decision, like getting dressed or cooking a pot of spaghetti. Still, others are activities that are so complicated it's hard to believe that we can do them with barely a thought. Take any sport, hobby, or activity that you do on a fairly regular basis and picture yourself going through all the steps you take to perform that activity. There's a heck of a lot going on at one time and you don't even know half of it. If your sport is softball or baseball, imagine stepping up to the plate and everything you do and think from that moment on, waiting for the pitch and deciding whether or not to swing. If you swing, do you hit the ball? And if you did, which way did it go? Should you run? If you do and you make it safely to first base, take a quick look around. Where's the ball? Can you get to the second base or should you stay on first? Watch the next pitch. Pay attention to the catcher. Maybe you can steal second. These are just a few obvious decisions. There are many more going on at the same time. Most of these decisions and all the actions that follow, each one have to happen automatically or you won't stay in the game for long. All of this happens out of habit. The process is essentially the same for any routine behavior. Once the brain identifies the cue for a routine it has stored away in memory, in this case, picking up the bat, the brain's autopilot takes over and runs the routine, freeing the rest of the brain to think other thoughts or to join in on the routine. As far as we know, habits have played the role of an evolutionary advantage in our survival. The human brain has learned to favor choices that conserve energy, a life-sustaining function from the earliest years of human history, a time when food was scarce and acquiring it would have been an energy-draining activity. Our brains are obligingly happy to make just about any routine behavior into a habit because habits make efficient use of available energy and space. The value in this highly effective brain of ours can be seen in the freedom we have to think lofty thoughts and the ability to come up with imaginative solutions to any challenge that confronts us. The ability to conserve mental effort is not without its faults. If our brain should power down at the wrong moment, we could fail to notice something important like the predator over there lurking in the bushes, or that speeding car headed right at us as we enter an intersection. As a way to bump the odds in our favor, the brain has developed a system that helps it determine it and when it's safe to let the particular habit take over. Research with rats can demonstrate how this system works. Duhigg, 2014. A group of rats were trained to run through a maze while tiny electrodes recorded their brain activity. Researchers noticed 3 spikes in the rats' brain's activity. The first occurred at the start of the maze. Another spike each time a researcher made a clicking sound at a strategic point along the route, and the third spike at the moment the rat reached the end of the maze where a chocolate reward was waiting. As it turns out, those spikes were markers of the brain's decision to hand over the controls for behavior to a specific habit. Unable to see beyond the wall of the maze, it would be difficult for a rat to know whether it was secure inside a safety zone or if a scary or unfamiliar cupboard with a hungry cat on the prowl close by. To cope with this uncertainty, the brain spends a lot of effort looking for a hint or trigger that signals a behavior pattern it should use. In this case, the trigger comes in the form of a sound. If the rat hears a click, it knows to go with the maze habit. If it hears a cat's meow, it chooses a different pattern. Then, at the end of the activity, when the chocolate reward appears, the brain shakes itself awake and checks to make sure everything is safe and sound as expected. A similar process operates in the human brain as a three-part loop. First, there is a cue, a trigger that tells your brain it's time to switch over to automatic mode and which habit to use. Then, the routine, either physical, mental, or emotional, plays itself out. Finally, there is a reward that helps your brain decide whether or not this particular pattern is worth remembering for the future. The positive habit feedback loop. Practice over time creates a three-part streaming loop that has a trigger or a cue, a specific behavior associated with that trigger, and a reward that reinforces the behavior when it is performed. Every time the loop runs through a full cycle of trigger, behavior, reward, the loop is strengthened and eventually learns to run on its own. Meanwhile, the bond between the trigger and the reward grows stronger until the two become so closely entwined that your brain can no longer imagine the presence of one without that of the other. The resulting pattern is a powerful cycle of desire, anticipation, and reward, the perfect setup for a new habit. Habits are maintained by their feedback loop, and you already know that habits are the brain's autopilot, allowing us to focus on other things. Sometimes this automation can be so strong that you have to be relentless in the fight to overcome it, and unless you replace it with a new habit, the old one will continue to kick in automatically. Habits have another unnerving talent you should prepare for. They can hide. In one study, habits were trained to repeatedly run through a maze until reaching the end without a wrong turn became a habit. Then they put a stop to the habit by changing the reward. Later on, the researchers put the reward back in its original place, and to their surprise, the rats performed the old habit without missing a beat. Maybe there's some truth to that old familiar phrase, once you learn to ride a bike, you'll never forget how. It seems that old habits never disappear completely. Alexander, 2013. This might seem like a major obstacle to overcoming negative behavior, but habits may be so persistent because this was an evolutionary advantage. Imagine the problems if you had to relearn things like the routine aspects of your job after every weekend off, or if your kids had to find their way to school as if for the first time at every spring or summer break. The downside is that the human mind plays no favorites when it comes to bad versus good habits. To your brain, they're the same. So if you have conquered a bad habit, be aware that it's really just hibernating, ready to jump back into the fray when conditions are right. This explains in part why it's so hard to establish long-term exercise routine or to change what we eat. If our habit is to sit in front of the TV during dinner, that pattern will stick inside our heads. On the other hand, if we learn to create new routines that overpower the unwanted behavior, that is, if we take deliberate measures to interrupt the feedback loop, we can force those bad habits into the background. And once we create a new pattern overlay, say going for a walk right after dinner, it will become as automatic as any other habit. Habits help to keep our brains quietly humming along. We know that without the energy-conserving function of our habits, our brains would shut down, overwhelmed by the minutiae of daily life. Certain types of brain injuries and diseases can leave a person in a mental state of paralysis that interferes with the performance of everyday activities like opening a door or deciding what to eat. They may lose the ability to ignore what we usually consider to be insignificant details. For example, they cannot recognize facial expressions, including fear and disgust, because they don't know what to focus on. With an injured brain, access to the hundreds of habits that we rely on is lost. Habits that include the way we handle any number of tiny details of everyday decisions that make our lives easier and more productive. Were you delayed this morning while you tried to remember how to put your shoes on and socks on? Do you have to stop to figure out if you should use a fork or a spoon to eat your cereal with? Of course not. Those decisions are trouble-free habits. As long as your brain is healthy and the cues remain constant, these familiar routines will continue to kick in right when they are supposed to. It should be just as easy for you to interpret the facial expressions of the people you see throughout the day. What about the way you see yourself? Your self-image is important to your confidence and to the ability to interact effectively with others. For good or bad, the way we act towards others is a reflection of the way we see ourselves. If our self-image is high, for example, the tendency is for us to expect to be treated with respect and fairness, which are the same standards we use to treat others. If our self-image is low, our relationships with others will be adversely affected. The good news is that we can make positive changes if our self-image is one that does not support our goals. The act of achieving a goal, even a simple one, can start the process of positive change. There is nothing better for your self-image than having some success under your belt. In Major League Baseball, the best hitter has a batting average of .330, while an average hitter has a batting average of .260. The difference works out to be 7 more hits per 100 at the plate. Doesn't sound like much, does it? But it also works out to a difference of several $1 million per player. Of course, both are great baseball players. Both are in great shape. But I can guarantee you that the one that hits .330 is the one that sees himself as a better hitter. Yet the very same .330 hitter fails twice as much as he succeeds. He just doesn't let that thought stick around in his head. He can't afford it. He would not have a .330 average if he did. It really is that simple. Think about this. These guys play baseball almost every day during the season. They take batting practice before every game, and some of them practice on their day off. If you want to be the best at what you do, then you have to practice too. Your self-image, just like everything else, is a habit. You have a habitual way of thinking about yourself, and, for better or worse, and like any other habit, if it's not serving you well, change it so it does. The bumblebee revisited. The front edge of a pitcher's plate is 18 inches behind the center of the mound, making the front edge midpoint at 60 feet 6 inches from the rear edge of home plate. 6 inches in front of the pitcher's plate, the mound begins to slope downward in a straight shot towards home. That's how far the pitcher has to throw the ball to land in the catcher's mitt, 60 feet 6 inches. Or better yet, that's how far the batter has to wait to react to hit the ball. That's right. Like the bumblebee story, it sounds impossible. A ball roughly 3 inches in diameter, airborne and moving at an average speed of 85 to 95 miles per hour, so fast that it takes but a fraction of a second to pass over the spot where the batter stands poised to swing and run in a single fluid motion. The batter has long practiced for this moment, keenly aware that the odds of a hit are against him. Today's pitchers have at least 3 to 5 different pitches. The two-seam fastball, the four-seam fastball, the infamous curveball, and the slider, a repertoire that leaves the batter guessing at what the pitcher will throw. When he guesses right, the odds shift slightly in favor that he'll make a hit, proving that baseball is a mix of talent, intuition, experience, and a lot of practice. Because the pitcher invariably has the advantage, when a hitter has a batting average of .330 or better, or has more than 100 runs batted into home plate, RBIs, in a single season, well, what you've got is baseball's equivalent to the bumblebee, a thing that is truly amazing. Some people go through life thinking that the odds are stacked against them, that their goals, if they attempt to have any at all, are just too tough. If you think that your goals are too tough, well, you're probably correct. But they are not impossible if you are willing to keep at it. It's possible to achieve amazing things regardless of the odds. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was at first reluctant as he stepped in to lead the modern civil rights movement. Under his 13-year leadership, more progress was made towards racial equality than in the preceding 350 years. As if that alone wasn't achievement enough, he accomplished this while advocating nonviolent protest, a method he learned from Gandhi. King was so successful that he started a campaign to end poverty and another to end international unrest, working tirelessly against the odds until his life was cut short by an assassin's bullet. We can only wonder at what more he could have gone on to achieve. King's life can still inspire us when things get really tough. The person who practices on a regular basis, who shows up every day, works hard, and deals with the failure in a constructive way, this is the person who achieves the greatest success. You have to believe in yourself. If you are not working on your attitude and self-image every